Busy time in Toronto for the sports fans, given that the Canadian Open is here this week out at Glen Abbey. The Canadian Open of tennis, the Rogers Cup, begins in just over a week. Milos Raonic is here to that end. But before we get there, Milos, welcome, by the way. Thanks for
Thank you for
joining
having
us. Before we get there and the obvious questions that will come with that and to set up that tournament, it's been a crazy couple of weeks for Toronto sports as well, with the Leafs and John Tavares, and then probably closer to your heart on the basketball end. And this is a wild one for you in particular, because I know you're a Raptor fan. You probably know DeMar a little bit through things, but you're also a San Antonio Spurs fan by nature, big Pop fan. So what was your reaction when you heard that the trade was made, Kawhi Leonard for DeMar DeRozan?
I guess because I was far away from home at that moment. I wasn't really connected to the whole emotional aspect of it with how it was dealt and so forth. So I think I sort of accepted it in a positive light quite quickly. I think it's hard in this off season for the Raptors to see sort of a very beloved coach and a beloved franchise player go. It's a little bit hard to swallow. I think it's also a big part of the sort of, let's say, concern or hesitation comes because there is no basketball being played. You can't see what's coming together right away. You got to wait, and you got to wait a couple more months. And I think minds tend to go to what might be the worst case scenario. You know, Kawhi comes and leaves after a year. But I think when you look at it overall, I think it's the right basketball move, and I think it's a great move, actually. I think you are getting a player that is going to be, for the first time, a superstar that's a former champion that Toronto's never had. I think he's going to realize that Toronto is a city that's been eager to win for a long time, and that's in all sports pretty much, especially with hockey and basketball. Basketball never winning, and hockey, it's been a pretty long time.
It may as well be never for a lot of a generation.
So, yeah. So he's going to get embraced really quickly, and all it takes is pretty much the right attitude, a sort of a positive appreciation and a gratitude, and a good game here or there. And that people swallow that up so quickly, and I think he'll love it and he'll thrive in it. And obviously, a lot of my affection for the Spurs was the system that they have, the whole program and that process that they have, and a no-nonsense team, a team that just really steps up and tries to do. I think it's one of the reasons why when it comes to NFL, I'm a Patriots fan as well. It's sort of the similar process that they have. And I think it's going to be a very good time and a very good winter of sports between the basketball and especially the hockey.
Since you broke in on tour, the serve has always been the weapon. Where was the point when you realized that the serve that carried you through the lower ranks, the junior ranks, and that kind of thing, even by itself, even the best on tour, wasn't going to be enough to get you where you want to go? And what's the first adjustment you remember making to add to that? Again, not blowing it up, not changing the way you play because it's your strength, but what was the first thing you did?
I think the first thing I really focused on was, what do I need to do to get ahead early in situations? And for me, the serve does that for me when it comes to my service games. Then I realized, okay, how do you get ahead early on the return games? It's going to be the return. And I think that's what I put the most time in, and just constantly finding ways to sort of keep that pressure. And I think that it's improved for me a lot. Obviously, has a long ways to go. My serve will always outshadow anything else I do, and I'm grateful for that because it's made things pretty good for me so far, and I think it'll continue to make things better for me. But you have to sort of always look back and always try to add some pieces on.
I want to ask you a question that I think the audience would really be interested in. By every objective measure, you had a great career. You one of the best tennis players in the world. I'm not your career high, whatever it was, number 3 or something. The point is, in the entire world, you have reached the highest level of your profession. What is fascinating to me is when I see Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic, these guys who have been that consistent for that long. Can you just give us a sense of how are they able to do that? Is it at that level? Is it a question that they're mentally at a different place? Is it the strokes? What separates the really truly best of the best from the best?
Mental, especially in tennis, when you have a sport that has so many different technical involvements in it. You know, it's not like basketball where you're sort of always shooting from shoulder height and above. You're not really sort of facing sideways and these kind of things. Yes, there's different angles you can take. Technically, there's a lot of different things. Everybody can hit the ball. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses and so forth, but it's the mental that really makes the biggest difference. And it's not only their mental, it's also what their presence can do to the other person.
Yes,
That's interesting.
like Tiger in his prime. We talked about that, right?
It's a lot of the time it could be the top guy can be in a very questionable state of mind, and it'll be the guy that's on the other side of the net that sort of, for lack of a better word, just drops the ball.
So it's really as something as like, I don't even know what the cool would be, but like if you were playing in the 90s and you walked on the court and Jordan was on the other side, immediately you see the back of the jersey and it just does something to you?
But it doesn't do it immediately. I think early in matches it doesn't do it. It's when it's those crunch moments that it really gets to you.
Yeah.
And then, especially in tennis, because there is no time limit, there is a lot of crunch moments that you're going to hit. And once you miss the first one, second one, where you sort of feel dejected and disappointed because maybe you don't feel the other person did something great. It was sort of you that beat yourself in those moments. That kind of negativity and sense of down feeling just weighs down on you, and it just lifts the other guy, and that's when the margin is made.
So basically, if you are at the point, I guess, if you've been there and you've won those majors, you can draw on the fact that I've been in these pressure moments before, and I've done
it. You can't. It doesn't matter how much somebody talks you through something or explains something to you. There's a whole different. You can't cheat the experience.
So it's really interesting. Then you really have to, I guess, give a lot of credit to both the men and the women who win their first major because they're overcoming something.
Especially if you do it later in your career.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can sort of fall into things and sort of be naive as a young person.
Right.
Just you're doing everything you know at that point. But if you're there winning your first major, late 20s, early 30s.
So like Halep or Kerber.
Yeah,
those are
it's
people
extremely because you have doubts at that point.
Right.
You don't have doubts when you're 19. You're just happy to be there and you're sort of breaking through. At 27, 28, 29, 30, you've built up and you've accumulated a lot of doubt. And you have to try to sort of quiet that, and you have to try to sort of filter it to be in the right state of mind, and that takes something special.
That's really interesting.
The Canadian event is not a major, but I know Mike Weir had always, especially in his prime, and it's around the same. I think he got to 5, almost got as high as you got on the tennis side, and almost won it on the 50th anniversary of the Canadian Open of the last time a Canadian won. It's much more beyond that for the Rogers Cup event, which used to be called the Canadian Open. Is it? I know that the 4 Grand Slams, and everyone will give you that for sure, are the most important. But because you're playing at home, especially when the tournament's in Toronto, does it feel a little more like that for you? And do you tend to put the right kind of pressure on yourself, wanting to be that hometown guy to win it?
Yeah, it's exciting. And when I look at it, there's 5 really standouts of tournaments that make a difference in my schedule. That it's like, hey, here's a point where I want to be in the best shape I can be, and here's a point that I would like to peak for, and that is the 4 Slams and the Masters. It doesn't really matter if it's in Toronto or Montreal. Yeah. Toronto, it's especially endearing to me because it's the only tournament I ever attended not as a player, like when I was younger. Mm-hmm. Montreal also grew on me because I spent 2-3 years training there at that same facility where it's played. So I think I have a special feeling in both. Obviously, a bit more attention from friends and family when it's in Toronto. But I find it motivating more than anything. I think those tough moments when you're facing them matches, which happens through every match, there's no sort of match that really goes one way from beginning to end. It sort of lifts you and it makes the good moments last a little bit longer. And the first few years of my career, I wasn't always necessarily sure how to handle it and what to expect of myself and so forth. But now it's an excitement to come back here, play, and it's extremely motivating and something that I've learned to manage significantly better over the years.
Couple things. First of all, how's the health? How's the leg?
It's good. Yeah, it took me a couple days after Wimbledon to get in the right shape, but I'm good there. I've been at training now, and I got a couple more days to go to put in some good work.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to ask you, because I think people are always curious when you say about setting up your schedule and you're at the point where you've earned that right and the ability to not have to play and grind it out every week. So give us what after the treatment, what your sort of the ledger is from the time that the Wimbledon run ends before you put first ball in the air in Toronto. Where have you been, what you do, and leading up to the event?
Yeah, I think because you have before, as Wimbledon's finishing, it's a pretty mentally strenuous time.
I bet.
You have 2 Grand Slams there, back-to-back, pretty close, the most condensed we have it throughout the year. So you sort of get away for a bit. And then you come back to it and you try to get in shape quickly. And then the days are pretty packed. You train 2 hours on court in the morning. You'll probably do another hour and a half in the gym, and then you'll come back in the afternoon and do another 2 hours either on court or in the gym. So those are full days, 6 days a week, and you put in the time, and you hope that things sort of click and come together when the tournament starts.
Is there a particular major that you like best for you, and if so, why? Why is it that major?
Selfishly, I've played my best at Wimbledon. It just has the best experiences for me, but also Australia. I think Australia, I've had some incredible chances there. I've just gotten hurt in some important scenarios, but I've played well, particularly at those two. One I wish I could play better at that I haven't had necessarily the same level of success that I believe I could have had is the U.S. Open.
Is there something that a tournament does that makes it a really good tournament for players, whether it's services, quality of the court, the hospitality administration? What are pro players at your level? What are they looking for from tournaments outside of obviously the obvious part in terms of the grounds are pristine and courts work and stuff like that?
I think the main thing is your experience and your sort of mental state there that will allow you. Some guys struggle in Australia because they don't feel they just played enough the last few weeks because we're just coming back from stopping for about 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some guys that just need more time. There's some guys like myself personally, I don't like to play a lot of matches. I actually thrive on, hey, give me a training block, put me straight into matches. The first few I'll be a little bit rusty, but I can find my way pretty quickly. I just need to be in the right shape and health. I think cities are a big part of it because we're playing in 4 major cities at that moment. Some guys struggle at Wimbledon because it's in a suburb, and they're like, "Okay,
not in a city."
It's
really
not. It's 45 minutes.
They
Wimbledon
can't just walk from the room.
Wimbledon is a very ritzy suburb of London,
right?
And some guys don't know what to do there. You're on your day off. Nobody really stays in hotels. There's no hotel there, so you're renting houses from families that live there all around the year that are renting out their houses for 3 weeks. So guys don't know what to do with themselves. So some guys like that. I like that personally. I think it's a nice, more homely feel. So there's everything. The people, the atmosphere. One thing I think every player would agree is they hate having a long commute from their accommodation to the tennis facility.
That's interesting.
Because
the U.S. Open used to have that for a while,
Well,
right?
it still does.
Yeah.
If
you stay in New York City.
Well, everybody pretty much stays in New York City. The closest you can stay is Midtown Tunnel.
Yeah.
And that's a 25-minute commute in the best case scenario.
The other thing about your profession is that it is played in so many different languages. Something I always wanted to ask a pro tennis player, but are you someone who knows like 10 words in like 25 different languages? How do you...
I know the score in most languages.
No,
that's for sure.
Yeah, but I'm saying like, or maybe you have people with you, but like, can you get around a city in terms of like, how to hail a cab somewhere? Or
you sort of...
Or maybe Uber's everywhere at this point.
You pick up the dialects. Maybe you make a fool out of yourself.
Oh, so what though?
And you think maybe you're saying something right, and the driver might think you're insulting them. It can go. It can go all over the place.
Very quick.
It's a very fine line. But you do pick up a lot of things. You pick up the thank yous, where you want. You know every hotel and how to say it. And if you don't know the hotel, the first thing you learn is you pick up those business cards and you're handing those things out like they're $1 bills.
But the score though, that's interesting. So every tournament that's not played in an English-speaking country, know the score.
They say the score in their native language first and then English.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you can pick that up.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So,
Interesting. A final one for you. Our man, Arash Madani, has long been connected to you at Davis Cup and Rogers Cup. You've had some fun at his expense on the court.
Yes.
Around that loop, where does Arash sit with the interviews? Because he loves the game. And he has passion for it. And he's a good sport, too. I think he can put up with that.
Yeah,
is
he
that
likes
pretty
the banter.
standard? He does, yes.
Yeah.
Too much?
No, I think it's fun.
Yeah.
I think it's fun. And I think it's fun that he's relaxed about it. He sort of dishes it. So that means you can go back and you can dish it without sort of crossing any lines. And I've spent a lot of time with him outside of any sort of interview scenario in a very casual sense. We've created a great kind of friendship. So there is a lot more freedom and fun, and it's one of the more enjoyable times. I think just sometimes when I see him, it's hard for me to be serious with him.
Yeah,
right.
When he comes out on court, like post-match at the Rogers Cup, I really don't want to answer those sometimes very
If he's on and you've
serious
won,
tennis questions.
very
right?
serious tennis questions, especially not with him. You know, you can put anybody else there, and I'd be all up for
you're
it.
waiting for the punchline kind of thing, right?
Or
With
you
him.
want to drop a punchline.
Yeah.